Where there's a whip, there's a way, but not for orcs in 40k, because they want to WAAAGH. They don't want to go to WAAAGH today. Except they do. They really do want to go WAAAGH. So, yes. The ones with whips are the Battle Sisters. And that's just weird to me. That's not the reason people aren't playing Battle Sisters. I'll have to talk about that tomorrow or something. You wouldn't get this sort of thing in 2nd edition, or if it did, it was kept from me in my precious child mind. Didn't stop me becoming a Warhammer player. But today is faction focus Orks. And we're going to be talking about them for a while. But in this introduction to Orks in 10th edition, we first must mention the Orks' background. Very simply, they're a kind of fungus that grows and then it becomes an orc, grown underground. The orc comes out, and then it naturally wants to group together with other orcs and also fight those other orcs. The orcs spend most of their time fighting each other, but they're a very numerous race across the galaxy, and the reason they're not just winning everything is because of how much time they spend fighting each other. However, this is also their strength. Orcs get bigger the more orcs they've beaten, and if you beat a bigger orc, you will naturally grow bigger yourself. Orcs follow the biggest leader, and these are called war bosses. And when a war boss has beaten enough people who have beaten enough people below them, who have beaten enough people below them, you get a massive group of orcs, and they go on a WAAAGH, which is a crusade, with all of the orcs that are available. And these can be system-spanning, world-spanning, potentially galaxy-spanning. WAAAGH just means war, but it's the word got lengthened. I don't know how that would work in other languages. Krieger! Except we already have Krieg. The Death Corps of Krieg. Okay, the Orks came from an 80s idea of hooliganism and this sort of boys, boys, boys mentality. Something that we've definitely gotten rid of by now, with lads, 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 who generally go in for punching each other in the face as a means of communicating friendliness. So, Orks are toughness 5. They've been toughness 5 since they got updated in 9th edition, and that meant that a lasgun could sort of look down on a bolt gun because they both needed a 5 to wound an orc. But lasguns and the models carrying them were cheaper, and with rules like Born Soldiers, lasguns were outperforming bolt guns and you got more of them, making guardsmen a better choice than Space Marines when fighting orcs. And the change in toughness to have them toughness 5 did put them much more like their 2nd edition versions, where 2 of them could be about the equivalent of a Space Marine, rather than 4 or 5 of them, as it was in like 7th and 8th edition. Remember, this is tabletop Warhammer Marines, not movie Marines. Movie Marines is a term generally considered to be things like the Space Marines you see in the books, or in the video games like Space Marine that came out in 2011. Now that I've said that, YouTube's probably going to mark this as being about that game. You'd have to check that. See if it says Warhammer Space Marine 2011 right next to the subscribe button. And while you're there, you could click it if you want. So toughness 5 has meant that the orcs were tougher, certainly, and they're keeping that extra toughness in 10th edition. But they're getting a lot more and actually getting a lot less. But every army is getting a lot less. The orcs have had Here We Go, which lets them reroll charges. They've had other rules that allow them to mob up, so that falling back orcs could group together with other orc units and form one big orc mob. That was a very characterful rule. We've seen them have the WAAAGH to get extra attacks. We've seen them have the WAAAGH to move faster. We've seen them have the WAAAGH to advance and charge. We've seen them have the WAAAGH also give them an invulnerable save, because even toughness 5 was not keeping the orcs on the board. And a 5-up invulnerable save will only take you so far. 6-up invulnerable save, even less. I play Battle Sisters. I know that a 6+ invulnerable save is rarely used, but still nice to have. Well, now this is the Orc rule for 10th edition. You can see how this WAAAGH rule is quite like the one I just mentioned. So, Orc units from your army are eligible to charge when they advanced. Very nice. +1 to the strength and attacks of Orcs. And Orcs also get a 5+ invulnerable save. Now, this is something that's called once per battle at the start of the battle round. So you don't get, like in 9th edition, a residual overhang from the previous battle round where they would have a 6+ invulnerable save. Still have the ability to advance and charge, so they're definitely getting into the fight, if not on turn 2, perhaps on turn 1, but certainly turn 3. By then you want to be well through the enemy. And an important change to note is that you call this at the start of a battle round rather than the start of your command phase. So you can benefit from that 5+ invulnerable save if you think you're going to take a lot of fire now that you're into closer range. It's very fitting for the Orks, and it suits them to have this powerful once per game ability. Now there are a lot of different ways to play the Orks, and they tended to be formed around the different tribes that the Orks had, and these formed their sub-factions. But the general different ways to play an Ork army were to be as hordes of boys and Gretchen, so you can flood objectives with Gretchen and flood the enemy with your Ork boys. Or you could do lots of mech walkers, have dreadnoughts and killer cans and morkanauts and things, and just have a massive stompy army to hit the enemy really hard. Or you could go for a speed war and have lots of vehicles that move really quickly and hit the enemy with trucks full of boys. Well, the only detachment rule available for now is Get Stuck In, and it's called the WAAAGH tribe, so it's very generic, and it gives you a pretty generic ability. It means you get sustained hits with melee weapons, so it does feel quite like the Goths have as their sub-faction rule, extra hits on a 6. So sustained hits 1 in melee means if you roll a 6 to hit in melee, you score 2 hits instead of 1. So if you had 10 Ork boys with something like 3 attacks each, you're looking at around 25 hits from 10 guys. The Ork units themselves are pretty unchanged compared to 9th edition, which rather makes sense because they were one of the last codexes to come out. You can see there they have their toughness 5, but they've also gone up to having a 5+ armor save, equal to the Imperial Guard, whereas normally they were relying on t-shirts. You can see these are pretty naked looking lads, especially on their chest. You would have thought a 6+ save was more appropriate, but now they also have a feel no pain of 6+, at least on the Beastsnagga Boyz. Previously, it was a 6+ invulnerable save to represent their luckiness when it came to hunting monsters and such. The feel no pain makes them even more resilient as they are getting a second save against all the damage that they might take from weapons like bolt guns and las guns that weren't otherwise getting through. 6+ invulnerable saves were only really effective against things that weren't getting through their normal armor save anyway. They still have that Monster Hunter specialism, and so they can reroll hit rolls against monsters and vehicles. Otherwise, their weapons are pretty unchanged. Even the chopper still gets -1 AP, so in addition when things are meant to be toned down quite a bit, we're still seeing a lot of deadly attacks, and a unit of 10 is getting 40 attacks at strength 6 when under the effects of the WAAAGH. So they're going to be cutting through quite a few things. We can see here that there are separate profiles for the boy and the knob. I've wondered how they were going to do this, but there is the knob with an extra wound. So I would expect Eldar Exarchs to have something very similar, and their Exarchs to have 2 wounds, as well as the different weapon options. I'm just hoping Space Marine Scouts can actually be led by a Scout Sergeant who isn't a regular Scout and has a better armor save, or an extra wound, as befits them more being an actual Space Marine who is leading and teaching the Scouts. The leadership of the Orks is pretty average at 7, but we saw yesterday the Custodes having a leadership of 6+. There is no rule that leadership for the Orks is dependent on unit size, previously called the mob rule. You'll just have to rely on the universal stratagem Insane Bravery to represent that in a narrative sense. Not that anyone's particularly fleeing in 10th edition, they just stopped caring about controlling objectives. If the Beastsnagga Boyz re-rolling hits against vehicles was not enough, then you want to get them in range of a war boss. Not just any war boss, not a Beastsnagga war boss, not a war boss on a bike, if they still even exist, or even a war boss on a big squiggy thing. You want Ghazghkull Thraka, but more importantly, you want his little lad Makari. Makari's banner gives a 12-inch aura of lethal hits. That means if you roll a 6 to hit, then you also automatically wound. Looking at the rules we have that have been leaked, the way that sustained hits and lethal hits interact is not entirely clear, but if it's done like 9th edition, then if you roll a 6 to hit, having both those abilities, one of those hits automatically wounds, the others you gain from sustained hits still have to roll to wound. So with sustained hits 1, if you roll a 6 to hit, then you get 1 automatic wound and you would roll 1 other dice as a wound roll, carrying on with that one as normal. Ghazghkull is looking pretty nasty, but I still think the best model of his pair is Makari, because there's a 2+ invulnerable save. Now, I really didn't want to see a 2+ invulnerable save. I wanted no invulnerable save to be better than 4+, because of how annoying that could be. And also note that they share the same toughness 6, for regression. Well, yes, because it just makes it easier for the whole unit if they have the same toughness. If it was a character leader inside a unit, then you would use the bodyguard unit's toughness until they were all dead and you were just hitting the character. But when you're firing all your weapons, you would use the bodyguard's toughness. So there's not much benefit to having a higher toughness leader inside a lower toughness squad. Other way around, definitely so. But thankfully there is at least one note to say that the invulnerable saves for Makari cannot be re-rolled. I really don't want to see a return to the times when you would have Tzeentch Screamers that had a 2+ invulnerable save that you could re-roll. It was insane. You could just fly that unit around and tie up anything, never move off an objective, essentially win the game just by having it. The rest of Ghazghkull, there isn't anything particularly special about regenerating command points, as we've seen with Guilliman or with Abaddon. Makari's Stabber is interesting because it has devastating wounds. Again, this little Gretchen is the best part of this unit. Devastating wounds means that if you roll a 6 to wound, it becomes a mortal wound, rather than the enemy getting an armor save, or invulnerable save, so he could be his own worst enemy. An epic hero indeed. Now, I've already talked about the Imperial Knights and the Chaos Knights earlier this week, but what about the Ork Knights? Well, their equivalent. The Stompa, which is really more of like a Titan-sized creature, rather than a Knight-sized creature. We don't know how many weapons it has, but the Death Cannon is pretty tasty at 3d6 shots. Remember, only about d6 of them are going to hit with ballistic skill 5+. Then again, it has Blast to really hit those hordes and big squads. The Strength 14, though, means it is an all-rounder and can take out vehicles as well as heavy infantry. -3 AP is going to cut through pretty much any save, except those invulnerable ones. And d6 damage means you get a little bit of randomness, and the Orks were always a very random and fun army. And I hope they get that back, rather than everything being set as you hit on a 2+, you wound on a 3+, you get this many attacks, and that's it. Let's have some crazy weapons and guns and random chances of success. That's what the Orks were really about, and it made them very fun. You could put Orks on the table and you know you were going to have a good time and your opponent was going to have a good time. There was never any feeling of being entirely mismatched when you were playing Orks. I'm noticing for the melee weapons they get the chance to strike or sweep. It's no longer just twice as many attacks if you sweep. When it was in 9th edition, it was generally better to choose the sweep option, even against something particularly tough. More attacks meant more chances to succeed, and there was a lot of special weapons and special rules that could interact with more attacks, like rerolling hit rolls of 1, or having full rerolls, or doing mortal wounds on a 6, things like that. So more attacks were generally considered better. Here, yeah, you get triple the attacks if you're sweeping. However, that strike attack is more than double the strength, with far higher AP and higher damage. So it is now going to be a general consideration which one you choose, rather than just sticking to the sweep every time. And rolling loads of dice is fun, so a lot of people just went with sweep. But what if you don't play an Ork Horde, and you don't like having loads of mechs? What if you're all about speed? Well, we haven't got the profile of these trucks, but we're guessing it would be, say, 12 to 14 inches as movement. And the Rukkatrukk Squigbuggy, which was very popular among snakebite players and anyone that wanted loads of shots on their vehicles, they're a mobile mortar. So their weapon has blast, ignores cover, and indirect fire. And it's pretty nasty at d6 plus 6 shots, plus any additional ones for blast. At strength 5 -1 AP, and the 2 damage means it's great for killing lots of space marines, even when they think they're hidden, such as behind a building on an objective. The only thing that's going to be drawn back by is that ballistic skill of 5+, because firing indirectly means you'll only be hitting on a 6. -1 to hit when you fire indirectly, and the enemy gains 1 point to their save because they count as being in cover. So just rely on the number of shots, averaging, 2 hits. So it's not going to go a long way when you're firing it indirectly, and being able to move around with its fast speed That's why we want to shoot directly at the enemy. One of the stratagems that the Orks can use is 2 command points, so it's going to be quite rare that it happens. And that is Orks is never beaten. It carries on from a stratagem that they had in 9th edition, where you can fight on death. You have to select your unit to use this ability after the enemy has declared its targets. So you have to see, that enemy unit's very scary. My unit is not going to stand up to that, but I want my Orks to do a lot of damage in return. This will be particularly nasty against units like Harlequins and Eldar close combat units, who hit hard, but really cannot take a hit in response. So each time a model in your Ork unit is destroyed, if that model is not fought already this phase, don't remove it from play. It can fight back after it's been killed. I've never really liked these fight on death abilities. Thankfully it's 2 command points, so it's rare that we're going to see it. However, when the creations of Fabius Bile, that Chaos Space Marine sub-faction, had it on everything, it was incredibly powerful. It got toned down, it now only works on a 4+ in 9th edition and doesn't appear in 10th edition. But it could be quite time-consuming and confusing if you had an opposing unit that could also do this ability. It could be particularly confusing if you have some ability that causes mortal wounds on death or something like that. So if a Ork unit was attacking a unit of Battle Sisters, and they'd chosen the Sacred Rite that let them roll a dice when they die, and on a 6 they do a mortal wound, you could have some Battle Sisters attacking, killing the Orks. The Orks fight back, kill some Battle Sisters. Then if you roll some 6s, more Orks die. Then all of the Orks that have died, apart from the ones they've already attacked, get to fight against the Battle Sisters, potentially killing more Orks. It meant that the fight phase got very confusing and went on for much longer than you'd think it should. But if you're going to be taking out those glass cannon units with your very tough, very stabby Orks, this is the way to do it. And we're also seeing that these stratagems are not tied to specific units. As Games Workshop has said, the specific unit abilities will be on the unit data card. So we have the Beastsnaggers being able to reroll hits against vehicles and monsters. That's just on their data card. Whereas this stratagem is for any Orks unit. So you could use it with an Ork Dreadnought. You really want to get in with those kill saws. Or Ork Knobs. If there was something that could get into close combat, kill your Ork Knobs before they could fight back, that's not going to happen anymore. They're going to be sawing their way through the enemy even as they go down. It's something worth saving up your command points for, depending on the specific enemy that you're facing. Now we see another stratagem for the WAAAGH tribe, the very generic, all things in one Ork tribe. I would expect to see a lot more specialized ones when the Codex comes out, and then I'm not sure if this one will actually stay. Whether it'll still be an option to keep the ones from the indexes once they come out, or it'll be, right, you've got a Codex now, all of that is scrapped. Supposedly, the index cards will remain the same, and Games Workshop has been rather upfront about that. What will probably change constantly is the points. That's why we're not seeing points on any of these index cards. That's how they will balance different units, rather than changing up their abilities in a particular way. But we'll have to see, in 3 months, 5 months time, when the first FAQ comes out, how much they stick to that, and how many index cards get reissued, and you'd have to reprint them. And maybe the ones that you buy in shop, because remember these are going to be sold in shop as well as being free online. Will they be changing the ones that you buy? Is there going to be a little sheet in it saying, yeah, sorry about that, these are out of date by now? I can't see them going through all of the different boxes, taking out the individual cards that are wrong, putting in updated versions or anything like that. It'll just be up to you to find them online, that there's actually a newer version of the cards you've just bought and that you've not got your full money's worth. But still, if they're all free online, whether they're updated in FAQs or not, that'd be great. So anyway, the stratagem. Here we go, a battle tactic stratagem that can be used in your movement phase. Thankfully we have these little icons on the side. Blue means it's used in your turn, green is on your turn or the opponent's turn, red you use it in your opponent's turn. The top symbol tells you which phase you use it in, so it's the movement phase. It also tells you clearly when, start of the movement phase. And it tells you this one command point. So that's all a very nice colour and symbol matching to make life a lot simpler for reading these stratagems. Because it was a pain to go through a list of lots and lots of different stratagems and think, okay, when do I use this one? Can I use this one? Have I missed my chance to use this one? Is this the right phase for it? And things like that. So I'm liking the new colour and symbol coded stratagems. This Here We Go stratagem will work great with infantry units, I'm thinking, more than the vehicles. and it'll go great when paired with calling the WAAAGH. You get +2 to advance and charge rolls for one unit. So you can say, oh, that unit of Mega Nobs, they really need to make that charge. Now they're more likely to. And the +2 to advance rolls will be able to counteract their otherwise very slow movement. Hair's getting in the way. Though we haven't seen points yet, the Orks remain looking pretty strong and able to put out a lot of damage. Hopefully they remain as fun as they are to play in previous editions. But much like the Genestealer cult, which I'll talk about again when they come out as a faction focus, they do rely on having one good turn to make sure everything works for them. The turn you call the WAAAGH will be the most important turn. Just as the Genestealer cult's second turn when they all pop up from underground or outflanking from the sides is what really makes or breaks the battle for them. Good luck to the green-skinned players out there. May the WAAAGH be ever in your favour. Make sure your car is painted red. And my viewers and darlings, have a great day of 40k.